Hello, and welcome to another episode of the So Are We Doing Life podcast. Today we have the amazing Madhu with us, and she is a leadership coach, and she has been featured in Forbes under 40 under 40. And I would just let her at this point tell us a little bit more about herself.
Thanks, Elsa. My name is Madhu, as you said, and I'm super happy to be here and grateful for this opportunity. So a bit about myself. I am really passionate about combining real world experience with proven neuroscience-based coaching and techniques to provide very personalized guidance and support for my clients. And how I do that is basically based on my background in psychology, and I specialize in behavior modification. I got myself certified from the Neuro Leadership Institute brain-based coaching, and I've been in the leadership space for about 10 years. I've been a VP of delivery and kind of really worked myself way up from being a junior business analyst all the way to VP of delivery in the IT space. And then decided that I am going to go into coaching because all leaders need to be good coaches. And I started doing coaching as part of me being a leader and started using my neuroscience techniques, being a leader and seeing tremendous effect. And so what happened was one of my previous coworkers that I worked with said, Mother, you have no idea what effect you have on people. And that's really what got me into this journey is that, oh, I really didn't know until they told me what effect I had on them. So
Thank you so much. I know we have a topic that we want to talk about today, but before we get to that, I do have a question for you. Just working in the industry, do you feel like you have obstacles working in this industry as a woman in the coaching field? Because you do a lot of executive coaching, right?
yes, I do. I do. And it's a great question. And I think that it really depends upon who you're talking to. There are some people that really gravitate towards me and they really love my energy and they're like, you're exactly what I need. And then there are some people who are like, you know what, you're too wishy-washy, you're too soft, and like this, we don't need soft leaders. And so it really goes back into the style that they resonate with, because a lot of the times when I talk about being a neuro-informed leader or a transformational leader, which is what I help my clients be, I'm really talking about how do you bridge the gap between a lot of the generations that you see in the workforce today. And how do you actually be a very emotional savvy leader? Because that's really what you need in order to lead a team nowadays. It's long gone are the days where you can say, yeah, I'm a laissez-faire leader or an authoritarian leader or this style or that style. Now you need to be whatever you need, your team needs you to be. And so you need to kind of combine a little bit of everything, regardless of your core personality, in order to be that for your team. And that's a hard pill to swallow. And so there's a lot of education, one that goes beyond before we even get started into this coaching journey. And that's kind of where I have my, strategy sessions that's completely complementary where we talk about a lot of these things. And that's really where we either see that we are a fit or we're not a fit. And so a lot of the times, people will just gravitate towards me because they're like, this makes so much sense. Other times they're like, she doesn't know what she's doing, or like, but I think the case studies and the results that my clients have for them speak for themselves. And so that's why I'm not too worried about that. I focus on who I can influence and I can impact.
I love that because I feel like a lot of times, like I do coaching as well. And I feel like depending on what type of coaching I'm doing will depend on like sometimes I get that kickback from just the male audience. And then
Mhm.
other times it's just most of the time it just flows. It's just who flows with me, who doesn't, who's okay with me, who's not. But I do notice that every now and then it's like you get that, I would say a little bit of a more old school type thinking where they're like, you're a woman in this field. I need you to prove to me that you know what you're doing. But
Yeah.
that's less often, I would say.
I think it's more about like the style of leadership because people think that, oh, I'm preaching being more empathetic driven or being more of a neuroinformed leader because I'm a woman. That's kind of like the more bias that kind of comes in, but not really. I'm not preaching this because I'm a woman or that's a better way. It's because that's what science tells us we need to be, regardless of whether you're a male or female. It's like it's a leadership science in that sense rather than a gender thing. And I think that's where there's that. I think it's a lot better. I think that people are realizing that. And one of the things that I realized is that it's not that they don't want to be empathetic. They feel like leadership and the organization doesn't allow the space for it. They don't know how to create the space for it. And so I'm kind of changing the conversations a bit around, whether this should be allowed or not. It's why can't you allow it? You're in a position of empowerment to allow it to be so. And so those are the kind of conversations I love to have and kind of shift perspectives away from more from the gender inequality to what kind of organization do you want to have?
I love that. Okay, so now let's get into the meat and the nitty-gritty of everything. Today we are going to talk about perfectionism and just how you approach perfectionism. And you're going to give us some tips today, right? Some practical
I am.
strategies.
Yes.
Awesome. So we're
So it
ready.
so let's kind of talk about, why we get into this perfectionism phase in the first thing itself. One of the reason why is that we have this fear of failure. And we think that, you know what, if we fail, we are not good enough. We associate the fear of failure to our self-worth. And that's really the biggest, cracks in our mind is that we've kind of society and our own experiences have taught us to create that linkages in our mind to say that if I fail, I'm going to, you know what, I'm not good enough. My self-worth is not good enough. And all of those things. And so one of the things that a powerful concept in neuroscience is called neuroplasticity. And what that means is that your brain has the ability to create new connections, let go of old connections and create new connections. And so the way that I really think about it is that if you're tending a garden and if you're trying to grow something, you know how hard those weeds keep cropping up. And so a lot of the times you need to keep pruning them and you need to cut them early, otherwise they become unmanageable. Well, our brain and what we have kind of developed along our life or something like that, where we have a lot of these things that we have kind of created these associations, but they're not only right or useful, and they're actually more damaging sometimes to our healthy version of ourselves that we want to be. And so we need to kind of pause, take a moment, and then kind of prune them to see, is that really necessary? Is this really useful for me? Or what is a new thing that I want to plant or insert in here as part of that? And so that's kind of the first step to kind of discovering, the root cause of why am I getting that perfectionist tendencies from?
Do you think a lot of that perfectionism and that fear of failure, do you think it's a lot of just like limited beliefs and like generational,
Yes.
I don't want to call it generational trauma because I feel like it's not that, like generational like lessons that have been passed down, like this is what we did because this is what our parents did, you know?
Yes. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that we all like our brain looks for patterns. And because our brain looks for patterns, we are kind of always looking for like, give me a template, give me a framework that we can follow, and then like I will follow that. So a lot of people have like frameworks for life, by a certain age, I need to do this, by this, I have to do this. If I'm not doing these things, then you know what, I'm considered a failure. Like that's kind of the reasoning and the logic that we kind of create those two things are really independent and we kind of create that connections because our brain wants to make sense of it. And the only way to make sense of it is to connect it, no matter how how use on the how unproductive it is as part of that. And so what we kind of do is that in terms of techniques and tips to kind of counteract that, one is actually helping reframe your failures as learning opportunities. And doing that in a proactive manner. So like And that's the hardest part because that's the first step in kind of getting into a growth mindset is how do you kind of reframe that? And so I'll give you a simple example. The first time that I did an event and I was like, okay, this everything has to go perfect. This is my, this is going to be, and I kind of created this like what a perfect event would look like in my head. And well, things didn't go perfectly. There are small things that went wrong, but I was the only one who knew that it went wrong. And so because the audience, my clients were like, this was such a great event. I've never been to an event like this before. When are you creating your next one? And I am like, really? So because I was kind of in my head hung up on things that didn't go right. But the outcome of what I wanted to achieve out of that event was actually achieved, even though things were not like the way that I had planned out in my head. And so one of the things that I really learned was that, you know what? Did I achieve the outcome? And if people said yes, that they achieved the outcome, that is a success. Like learn to celebrate that success for a minute. Doesn't mean that those things that went wrong. You can always look at it as, okay, for next time, this is what I need to watch out for, and like you can plan for that. But it doesn't take away from your success. And yeah, so when you think of it that way, you're like, okay, this makes sense. This helps, kind of thing.
I feel like sometimes we get so blinded by all of the flaws that we don't get a chance to enjoy the moment and to like not only focus on the outcome, but we don't even enjoy the moment. We don't even realize like the fun part and
Yeah.
where, and I feel like, the journey is kind of the important part. The all the in between to get to the outcome is really important, but we're so focused on, oh man, I can't believe that one thing wasn't perfect that we gloss over everything else.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say that I think the second tip that I have, and it really goes well with what you said, is set good enough standards. And this is again hard to do if you're like a complete perfectionist, but like when you're imagining as a perfectionist, if you're imagining this perfect, everything has to go this way, well, you've planned out all of the ins and outs, and you've probably over planned a lot of things as well, as part of that. So now, based on that very big 10,000 list of things that you have as part of your perfect plan, what is the bare good enough for you? And that's very important when I say for you, because it's not based on anyone else's standards, but it's based on your standards. And so when I talk about, okay, well, it's 10,000 things, can get it down to like top 10 things that if it goes well is good enough, is like success. And so let's list out those top 10 things. Let's just plan out for the top 10 things. And then everything else is great if you have it as part of that. And so when I kind of start going through and breaking this down into smaller steps and smaller tasks, one, I've just reduced cognitive load for my client by helping them through this process. And what I mean by that is they're not thinking about 10,000 things anymore. They're just talking, they're just working on the 10 things now. And that 10 things, it seems a lot more manageable than this 10,000 things. And it helps them make a bigger impact. Now they're not coming in with this nervous energy, anxiety energy whenever they're doing those 10 things. They're actually showing up fully. And that kind of shows in their body language, it shows in how they speak, it shows in how they're just present in that moment. And that helps with whatever their outcome is as part of that. And so they're like, yeah, I don't know why I was so hung up on this. I'm achieving the same results.
And I bet that that's probably really good for them too, because I bet it's a shock to them that they only have to focus on these few things instead of 10,000 things. I bet that's like the big thing because I know personally when I first started my business and I first started doing events, I always had this huge list and someone told me, no, you don't need a huge list, make a small list. And I
Yes.
realized that I got the same results and I was like, why was I working so hard to do all of these extra unnecessary things?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's exactly it, right? I think like that enjoyment that you got in terms of, oh my God, I achieved this. after that same moment you would have gotten if you'd worried about those 10,000 things versus that's short list as part of that. And that's the moment that I tell people to focus in on. Like visualize that moment. Then when you get it, spend the time to celebrate a success. Like when I got my first event out the door, next 3 days I did absolutely nothing but like kept talking about how good that event was because I was like, I need to be my own preacher. I need to kind of make sure that I'm practicing what I preach. And so I'm going to celebrate what a success movement was. I was looking at those pictures over and over again, and I was like making montages of them and things like that. And those are things that you don't have to, whether you publish them or not publish them, it's for you. Like just spending time in those activities is creating new connections in your brain, and it's actually releasing the endorphins in your brain to kind of be like, you know what? I love this. I'm excited about this. I'm doing this for myself as well. And it gets you that motivation.
And how do you think, like, when people have that time to celebrate themselves, do you think that plays a big role in how they view perfectionism or how they approach it? Does that make them like, I know when I have something, for example, and I do something and I don't celebrate it, I'm less focused on, I'm more focused on being perfect. But when I celebrate it, I don't worry about being perfect. I just worry about the fact that I did it.
Yeah. I think with the clients that I help with perfectionism, they've been perfectionists for so long. And so it takes a journey to unlearn a lot of these things as well. So it's not just a lot of people, think that it's one event, I celebrate one event and I'll be fine for the next time. And the problem is that, going back to my gardening analogy, if you don't get that weed big enough, it's going to keep popping up again. It keeps propping up and you least expanded. Sometimes not here, but it's going to pop up in another place, and you're like, I thought I got rid of you. And so our minds and how we think about perfectionism is kind of the same way in that sense, because we think that, hey, you know what? I wasn't a perfectionist in this area, so I'm good. I've got it managed, I've got it under control. But then you kind of see it maybe displaced, or when another thing comes up, you tend to kind of go back to those tendencies again. And so I think it's a very conscious way of being. And in terms of, you know what, am I celebrating all the moments? And sometimes, even in terms of celebration, we think we need the end product to celebrate. We don't take the time to celebrate the small milestones, the mini milestones. And so kind of getting into the practice of doing that helps with creating those new connections in your brain. And then it becomes more of, this is my norm. And the reason why I can say all of this is that I'm still working on my perfectionism. So this is not coming from a neuroscience person who's like, yeah, I'm not a perfectionist, but this is what you need to do. It's because I worry. I was a constant overthinker. I was a constant over-worrier. And I will always be like, oh my God, what happened to this? What happened to this? I will wake up in the night about things and be like, I have to do this. So I'm not getting a night's sleep because I'm doing that. And so I was like, okay, and how do I combat this? I am like, I can't go like this. It's not healthy for me. And so I started creating these checklists for myself. And a lot of this checklist actually has, what are your mini milestones? Did you celebrate your mini milestone? How are you going to celebrate your mini milestone? Visualize celebrating a mini milestone. So sometimes I could just like celebrating a mini milestone for me is just having ice cream because I have a huge sweet tooth. So I'm like, you know what? When I reach this, I'm going to have my favorite cup of ice cream. No guilt whatsoever.
I love it. Do you think that some people use perfectionism as a form of procrastination or, and I think that procrastination kind of goes back to that fear, right? So they use it, oh, this isn't perfect enough, so I can't do it yet.
Yes. It is a form of procrastination. It's also because they have built it out to something so big that they're like, why even bother? that procrastination comes in terms of the mind voice that's happening is because I need it to be perfect. Even if this one small thing is not there, I can't do it. If I can't do it, then why bother? So you kind of spin yourself into not doing it as part of that. And so then that's where just getting into action really helps with that. If you find yourself because you're a perfectionist because and through that you're not actually getting anything done, you're not moving forward. The number one thing I say is break things down into smaller things because if you have a big item, you're no way you're going to feel overwhelmed. That's human nature to feel overwhelmed if you have a big thing. But if you have 10 small things, just the act of like crossing it off will make you feel, oh my God, I feel I accomplished something today. And so that's just one step towards making progress. And so I think that really helps in terms of, if you, depending upon your root cause of your perfectionism, if that's the case, then just getting into that action mode is going to help you.
So it sounds like there's a lot of unlearning in the process.
Yes.
And I guess that requires a lot of, patience with yourself because you have, I think we live in I like to always say we live in a instant Amazon now type of environment. We ordered our package this morning and we want it this afternoon. And
Mm-hmm.
we feel the same way about change, even within ourselves, even though it took years for you to get like this, you kind
Yes.
of just want to, okay, well, what's the magic? What are the
Yeah.
magic words? What's the secret sauce to change me right now today?
Mm-hmm. And that's absolutely true. And I think the one good thing about neuroscience and coaching, though, is that I've had a lot of clients tell me that they were very surprised at how quickly they were able to stick to new habits. And it's because I gave them things that's bite-sized. It's not like this whole big thing. And I will always tell them the neuroscience or the brain-based thing of it after they've gotten their little success or what I call the aha moment. And I'm like, do you realize what I did to you? And they're like, oh, I didn't realize. And I'll give you an example. So for me, a lot of my coaching happens in multiple sessions. So I don't do one-on-one, like one session pricing. So I always offer packages because I feel like you need some amount of accountability and stability in order to kind of build growth. And so, but then I had one client that had a breakthrough in 20 minutes of our first session. And
Wow.
they're like, what do I do for the rest of the sessions? And I'm like, no, this is a small part of the journey.
They were like,
But
I'm done.
yeah, they were like, and so, and so what happened as part of that, and I was very excited by it because recently I was able to replicate it, and I was able to replicate it to 4 other clients of mine where they've all gotten their breakthrough moments in, within 1 or 2 sessions. And they're like, this is amazing. I never thought that this would be there. And then I said, okay, the next day I would kind of check in on them and I'm like, how's your how's that breakthrough moment happening? Is it still like a 10 or is it like did things happen? Did life happen to you? And maybe you're questioning, maybe I'm not there in front of you anymore, and like you're kind of going back to they're like, no, it's like the clarity is there and it's firm. Now it's a matter of doing it. And so a lot of the next sessions just becomes an accountability partner thing. It's more of like, hey, you said you wanted to do this. How did that go? What were some of your challenges? And let's kind of work through that. And so that's kind of the power of understanding what is the ticker. Like, because everyone has a different way that we interpret the world. And once you understand how you interpret the world and where you want to be, kind of creating those questions and kind of saying that, hey, your brain is actually doing this. Do you want it to do this? If not, do you want to change? Those are all things that every person has within their control. And that's a powerful thing when they realize that they can control that.
I love that because I think we live in that's also something. I think we live in a society where we aren't encouraged to have control. We aren't encouraged to live outside of the box, you know. We're
Yep,
definitely a label society where this is what is expected of you, but a lot of times that's not where you need to be for your personal growth.
exactly, exactly. That's why I kind of shy away initially from kind of using a lot of labels because I think labels sometimes can do a lot more hurt than good. So sometimes you need them in order to kind of put language around what has just happened and what does this breakthrough look like, and so it's useful in that sense. But we tend to overuse labels a lot, especially in this society. So it's more easier to just be like, go with the flow, experiences, enjoy this experience, and then I'll tell you what it is later. Because if I tell you something, then you're going to put so much more to it than it really is. And so I'll give you another example where like I do a lot of assessments for my clients. And when I assess my clients, I had one client tell me, well, you gave me this assessment, but um, you didn't really talk to me about it. Like, what was the use of that assessment? And I said, oh, okay, are you interested? Because one of the things that the assessment told me was that they were very fact-based and they didn't, they didn't really believe in psychology and they didn't believe in things. So they wanted to, everything needed to be very factual, very data focused. And so that was the nature of the relationship until they brought it up. And once they brought it up, I told them this. They're like, oh, yes, you're right. And they're like, you mean your other conversations are not like this?
And I think that's a big revelation within itself, right? Like to realize that this is not what everyone else is doing because we go through life every day thinking that this is the norm. And then we
Yeah,
find out, it's like that moment when you see those people that are like, wait, everybody's not doing that. And everybody's just kind of looking like, no, we definitely aren't. But you don't realize that because every day you're just being yourself.
exactly. And that goes back into being a leader as well, because going back to that earlier comment about like, is it hard to be in this role in the space as part of executive and leadership coaching? There are leaders who just feel like they need to be data oriented. There's no room for having, the emotional empathy as part of the organization because that's what like the organization needs. They just need a hard and fast leader. And I think and then you have other leaders within the same organization who's like, well, our morale is hurting. There are people like dissatisfied. There's a lot of these things that's happening on the ground. And they come to me and they're like, how do I bridge the gap when you have like different levels of leadership, kind of one in very very data focused and very like business like, and then you have the people leader who's like, hey, you know what, things are not happening here, like we need more gelling activities kind of things because we're not acting like a team. And one of the things I'll say is, can you turn this very people focused problem into a data problem? And so if you can say that, hey, our employee engagement survey states that we have a 50% decline in our morale rate, that's a very data focused way of saying the same thing, but it's sort of a gut feel. You're now having metrics to kind of back up what you're saying. And then if your solution can also be very much in terms of to improve the engagement rate, can we do X, Y, and Z? You're going to go and get the buy-in from that particular leader who's very data focused and very authoritarian. And they're like, I don't think it's going to work. I said, humor me and can you try it and see, like within your context. I'm like, take this concept, your context best, the language best. So like, don't take the verbatim language, but use it within the context, but just try and see what happens. And it worked.
I think for me, when I was still working corporate before I transitioned to full-time entrepreneur, I'm kind of in that middle, right? So I
Yeah.
see the two major differences of data only and then like a lot more feelings. And I would say the younger generation, I feel like they have this amazing thing about them that they are able to see things on a more human level. And not to say that is that not being able to or not being logical, that being logical is bad, but I feel like the older generations are much more logical, leave your feelings at the door. And I think that we live in a society now where you can't approach things that way. You can't approach leadership that way because yes, you may not, yes, there is a generational gap there, but you have to teach these people that are coming in, these younger people, because they're the ones who are going to replace you. They're the ones who are taking up the workforce. But you also have to be able to communicate with each other or nothing. Because what happens when you retire? What
Yeah.
happens when you're done? What happens to the company then?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also a bigger implication because what I say in a bigger implication in the corporate sense is that if you think of a lot of the tech startups and the like just any kind of startup, not even non-tech, it is actually led and founded by the younger generation, not necessarily the older generation. And the reason why that's a huge difference is because the younger generation are a lot more technology savvy. And when they're more technology savvy, they're actually using what I call neuromarketing and neuropsychology, even though they may not be utilizing those terminologies and ways, their marketing tactics are really very emotional based. If you take a look at the marketing of any new startup, it's very like emotion focused. It's provoking you, whether it's a good provoking or a bad provoking, it still provokes you. And they're inherently using emotions and human behavior to target your purchasing power. And that's a very different way of leading and running an organization. And so when you think about any large organization, and if you ask them um, who their competitors are, it's the startups. That's kind of like
Hmm.
disrupting the organization, the leadership world. And they don't understand how can they compete, how can it comes back to this philosophy of like how they lead and how they choose to run the organization. And there's good and bad in both, right? And I mean, because I've been in startups where they are just so focused on the next new thing, the next shiny thing, that they don't give it time to breathe. They don't give it time, an idea. It takes time for a good idea to kind of build it into something. And so you kind of need that. And then you also need to know when to pivot and when to kind of, hey, say that it's great A/B testing, but we need to pivot and move on as part of that. And so that balance is something that we as a society are struggling with. And is that because we either are going too slow for our liking or too fast for our liking? If there's no in between. And you have the majority of the population who's like, can we just find a balance? Like, we don't want to be AI everything, but we don't want to be like waiting 10 days for something for us that we want something now as well.
And also, there's something that I noticed with the startups, especially tech startups, is this need for everyone to be friends, right? There's a leadership without the leadership role. Like you have the like you said earlier, it's that balance, and sometimes you have those, I would say this because of the way that they approach things. I want everybody to be my friends. So they don't actually step up into the leadership role, even though they are the leader, because they're afraid of how people are going to react instead of just making that logical decision.
Yeah, and I think the in a lot of the startups, what's happening is that the leadership is not defined by title anymore.
Hmm.
And that's one of the things that I always talk about is that you're you shouldn't be defining leadership based on your title. You shouldn't be as a leader striving to be liked either. You're going to be defined as a leader when you can earn respect. And how you earn respect is based on you being able to make the decisions when it needs to, and you being able to ensure that you're getting the buy-in when it needs to, and knowing the difference as to when to have a decision and when to get the buy-in. And that really is what differentiates you in terms of being a leader. And so when the definition of that leadership has changed, now it doesn't matter whether you are a developer or like you are a business analyst or you're a marketing person. If you have that ability, you are now considered a leader and you're able to now lead and go forward with that. And so I think that that isn't actually a strength of an organization to be able to have that. So you see even a lot of mid-sized organizations now trying to get to a more flatter structure where they're having less levels in between the CTO and the CIOs to the teams that's actually doing the work, because they want to be able to promote this kind of thing, and that everyone's a leader within the organization, not just that you have a title for it.
Which is really good too, because that again leads to more buy-in. And a lot of times the really good ideas come from not the people at the top, it comes from the people who are doing the work every day, but no one's listening to them. But like
Yep.
when you have this type of setup, everyone gets a say. And I have noticed with the companies that I've worked with before, that when you have that setup where everybody is a leader and everyone is expected to be able to have input, they're more productive and more successful a lot faster.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
their employees are much more loyal.
Yep. And that's exactly what it takes to be like what I call a brain-friendly organization, because you're actually reaching out to the human factor. Like we all know the studies that say that money is not the only thing that retains an employee. It's actually their manager, the people, it's the environment that retains the employee. Not saying money is not important. Money is absolutely important, but it's you know, when you apply like the Maslow hierarchy of needs, but like before the Maslow's hierarchy was food, shelter, and then everything else. Right now, once you have the base pay that's taking care of your basic needs, the employee stays because of other factors, not because of that pay. And so what makes a loyal employee and what makes them valuable is the amount of knowledge that they have gained. Because there's absolutely a cost in to an organization when they keep having a churn in their employees. You're not actually ever innovating. You're just trying to keep the lights on at a certain time. And so how long are you going to just maintaining and working hard to keep the lights on when you could be innovating?
And that is such a big question that a lot of people don't ask themselves, especially, they ask themselves all the other questions, but I feel like they miss the big questions, and the big questions are actually the quiet questions. Those are the questions that we don't think about asking, or we're like, that's not important, but they really are the important things that we need to be talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's exactly what an executive coach helps you do. Because one of the things that I get to with a leader is what are their goals? And I'm like, okay, well, how are they approaching their goal? Are they looking, because we all have blind spots and you can't see your own blind spot. And so you always need someone external to be able to point out what your blind spot is. But once you know it, then you know to check for it. And so I always, I always like simple analogies, and I always treat it back to like driving a car. Like when I first learned driving, I didn't know I would need to check for the blind spot. I'd be like, oh my God, that's the hardest thing to do is to like check for that blind spot. But now I know that if I don't check for that blind spot, I'm screwed. Like, we need to
Yes.
kind of make sure, we need to always be checking for that blind spot. And so it becomes second nature for us. When you've driven long enough, it becomes second nature to be checking for that. But when you're learning, it's hassle. You're like having this stress in terms of lane changing and checking for it. And especially if you're in Toronto and 401 and like
The same for California. It's woo.
yeah.
And I
And
and it, that's really important as being in business, because when you're at the top, you always have someone looking out for you, but you also always have someone waiting for you to mess up so that they can move in.
yes,
And
yes.
so it's really nice to have someone there to say, hey, what about this, you know?
Yeah.
So when you work with people, do you work with just one-on-one or do you work with one-on-one and groups?
I do both. So I offer an array of services. So I do one-on-one coaching with leaders. I also do group coaching. And when I say group, and people always like, what's group coaching and how can you group coach? And so my group coaching is very interesting in that there's a theory component, but then in a safe space, you get to practice all of the techniques that I teach you in that theory. So right away. And so it's one of those things where a lot of the times in the leadership space, you're told you need to do this, you need to be this, but no one actually gives you this time and the space to practice it in a way that can actually help you like gain that skill set. They just think that, oh, you're a leader, you should have it. How? And so that's what the group coaching does, is that it enables you to have that self-awareness and self-coaching. And so because one of the principles that I believe in is that you don't need me forever. And once I teach you and once you know where to look, I'm giving you skills for life. I'm giving you skills to be able to do this for yourself. So that's what the group coaching enables. And then I do workshops as well. So a lot of the times, especially in the new year, I do things like how do you have effective goal setting? How do you have an effective performance plan for the whole year? So it shouldn't just be at the end of the year and mid-year check-ins. So in order for you to set up your whole organization right, so I do these mini workshops as well for a lot of organizations. And that's when they really realize that, hey, you know what, this could really help like either certain few key leaders having that one-on-one program and kind of going through that, because then that's a trickle effect that they have into the organization as part of this. Or then get into a group coaching where like one department or one team will kind of get into that group coaching and they do it as a team. And you see the most return on investment for them when they actually go through together as a team, because then they're learning together. They bring in their scenarios, their work struggles into this and learn effective strategies on how to combat that. And so you get like really great ROI for that as well.
I've done both individual coaching and group coaching on both sides, meaning I've been the person being coached and I've been the person coaching. And I will say there is an added value to having that group coaching because, especially when you have a bunch of leaders in the room, because it's really like an interesting take when you get to see someone else's leadership style play out, especially if it's similar to yours, but they've made a very different decision than you would have made. And it's kind
Yes.
of nice because you're also learning from each other when you do that.
Absolutely. And that's the biggest benefit, is because when you have different personality styles and you put them in a breakout room together and see what comes out of a scenario, how they influence each other is very interesting. And so a lot of the times in my group coaching, I will kind of give them a scenario, and it's a very real scenario that they would have said that they're struggling with. And then I would put out to them, we'll see how they kind of go and kind of coach each other. And then when we come back into the group setting, I kind of point out what they were inherently using in terms of theories and strategies, and to say like, pay attention to this because you're doing it inherently, but if you now do it consciously, then the effect of it is going to be so much more. Because you're now going to understand and look at other ways that you're going to consciously keep applying it, not just for this situation. And that's going to maybe help you de-escalate other areas. And so that kind of aha moment of that, like, oh my God, you mean I can use this and this area? That's really the benefit of that group coaching. And so like even in my group coaching, I still do like one-on-one as part of like there's a one-on-one element in the beginning of the group coaching program and then the end of the group coaching program. Because as part of the group coaching, I want you to be set up for success. So ensure that you get how are you going to utilize the group coaching as that one-on-one talk in the beginning of the program. And at the end, making sure that you actually have a roadmap that you can follow through and go back to, because this is not the end of your journey. Group coaching program is not the end of the journey. It's just the beginning to kind of get you into the state. And now how do you consciously keep practicing this?
I think that is so great. I'm going to make sure that I get everything from you so everyone knows how to be in touch with you and work with you. This is the perfect time of year, in my opinion, to really get moving on this. Like, I know a lot of people like to wait until the beginning of the year and
Yes.
start doing everything, but why wait until the beginning of the year when you can just get started now so that you can start the year off right instead of running to catch up to this is what I
Exactly.
want to do. So,
Exactly. Yeah, and I agree with that too. And that's one of those things where I do it. Like I always say, like, there's nothing stopping you from doing it now. From like do it in, like start now, even if it's half an hour, 1 hour per day. Yes, holidays are always going to be there. Holidays are always going to come. Family commitments are always going to be there. People say like I'll do it in January, but I'm like, hey, you know what? March break is just around the corner when you start in
mhm,
January. Then there's summer, and then there's back to school. So there's always going to be things happening in the throughout the year that's going to give you that option to say no, maybe later, maybe when I have time.
mhm.
If this
And
is a
then
priority, you will make a time.
exactly. And then you kind of get that head start. And it's kind of nice because so I tried something different this year. I normally do the nine, I guess they're calling it the 90-day arc now. That's not what
Yeah,
we called it before, where the last 90 days I really push hard. I push hard in the last 90 days the way a lot of people push hard at the beginning of the year because I feel like I when I give myself a time frame, I personally feel like I get progress, right? But this year, I tried something different. Instead of doing, I saw this little challenge from someone that I follow, and she said something that I didn't think about before. She was like, "Why are we pushing for the end of the year when the year is over?" She was like, "At the end of the year, you need to be pushing for the beginning of the year." And I feel like, that's the same with coaching. You need to go into this for what you want to do, not what you've already done, not what's already passed. You need to be looking at what is it that I want to set the foundation for. And that's
absolutely.
why I think what you do is so great because you're setting the foundation for it. Let's move on to what you want, not what has already happened.
Exactly. And that's where like I always tell my clients as well, like, this year is done. Like what can you do in November and December? Like November is still almost done, and then you have December and you have everyone's just trying to like go home and like holiday season and like worried about like Christmas and things like that. But I offer a lot of workshops that are going to be helping you set up for the new year. And there's so like one of the things, the workshops I already mentioned was like what I call rewiring for success. So how do you do goals for starting of the year right? So how do you enhance that? How do you ensure that you are on the right track? Organizations are looking at that right now. Like, hey, what are we going to do for Q1? Well, let's start on that because that's like a maybe, and that's why I call it a workshop because you don't need a lot of investment on those kind of areas. You can do a 1 day and you can make sure that you're actually operationalizing it as part of your talk so that you're actually set up. You would still have time to pivot if you haven't thought about certain areas by kind of going into that workshop. The next one is like optimizing for peak performance. So how do you keep your employees engaged and motivated? How do you ensure that feedback is not seen as a negative thing, but how do you create this culture of positive feedback and pure feedback? That is evergreen. Like you would want that all the time as part of that.
Yes.
And same thing with like rewiring your brain for change. Everything that we talked about today, there's a lot in there to unpack in terms of for an organization and create those practice and skill sets. So these kind of things can be done at any point in time, but especially within the end of the year, new year, to set yourself up for the upcoming year. Because now you can create more achievable, realistic goals, and you can actually make your 2025 so much more productive and effective.
And my favorite thing about what you do, and I hope everybody goes and checks out everything. My favorite thing about what you do is, yes, you are doing this from a leadership standpoint, but really you're giving everyone life goals and like life tips and things to help them in every area. Like if they take what you teach them and apply it to their life, I think that they will get so much personal growth. And I think that's my favorite part about what you do is that because at first I was like, these are life skills. I wonder if people know that these are life skills, but but it's so
Yeah,
hard, you know?
yeah, and you're absolutely right. And I have had so many clients tell me that I've like really impacted their personal life. And I think why I chose, leadership as a niche was really because that was my comfort area. Like that's really what I knew, like in terms of my experience and what everything that I've kind of what I know and like without like eyes closed was like yeah I used to be a tech leader. I now know neuroscience. I now know coaching. Let's put all of them together and this is the value that I can kind of offer. But then I'm also going through this discovery where like as I'm talking and being on more podcasts as guests, people are like, I think I'm gonna come to you. I'm gonna come to you for this. I'm gonna come to you for this. And I'm like, absolutely, because my goal is to help you realize your full potential at the end of the day. And so if you think that I can help you do that based on our conversations and what you've heard me speak, then let's chat.
I love it. So we are going to get all of your information, and I'm pretty sure we will probably have you back or at least invite you back for a future episode. I think this is such a great topic. I think everything that you do is so great, and I just want everybody to know all about it. So we'll get all of your information, and I'll make sure everybody has anything they need to contact you. If they don't know how to contact you, they can contact me, and I will definitely connect you with each other. Do you have any last words for our audience?
It's been an absolute pleasure. Also, you have been a great host as well. It's been great getting to know you through this. So super happy to have this episode and looking for future ones as well.
Thank you. And again, thank you everyone for tuning in. Definitely tune in for another episode and stay curious, stay honest, and keep doing life your way.